We've gone 17 plus minutes without talking about Victor Wembanyama, which is either a crime or an accomplishment, depending on how you look at it. Pop said he has no idea how he's going to use Wemby on offense, which I got a kick out of. How do you envision the Spurs using on offense? As I told you before we started, I don't watch a ton of preseason basketball. I try not to let it color like my overall impressions as I'm doing this outlooks. Are you taking anything away from that first game with how they're going to use him? Just what type of role or freedom do you expect him to have on the offensive end?
Yeah, that's really interesting because I know Pop, like you said, he was like, I don't really know how we're going to use him. And I know he was asked again. And I think yesterday he was saying, like, we're just kind of going to give him basically like free roam. Like, let's see what he can do. Let's see what he's comfortable. Let's see what he's good at. Like, and then we'll reevaluate. And I think that's probably like a good plan, right? Like, let's see what he can do. There are some things that I think I would stray away from. Like, I don't really want to see him dribbling the ball on the perimeter all that much, like self-creating. I don't like, to be honest with you, he's pretty weak. Like, he doesn't have like a strong base. He has a really high center of gravity. Like, people love seeing him with the ball in his hands, and they love to see him like hitting a crossover behind the back. But his handle's really not that functional. Like, he's one of those guys who, like, for example, when I go to the gym and I do dribble moves, yeah, I can pull off a few dribble moves. I'm not going anywhere. Like, that's how I see Wemby a lot. Like, he can do some stuff with the ball in his hands, but that doesn't mean he's going anywhere. Like, he has a really hard time. Well, we talked about it with Vassell, and when you're as big as Wemby and your center of gravity is that insanely high, like, you have a hard time rounding the corner. You're going to have a hard time going through guys. Like, I know that he basically headbutted Chet Holmgren yesterday on the way to an and one. And like, that was really like one of the two finishes he had, like directly at the rim, I guess, self-creating. But I just don't think that that's really where he's best suited. And I think the shot selection is going to be a big deal. Like, he talked about, Pop hasn't yelled at me too much. And I'm sure that'll continue to be the case. Like, he's the big guy in town now, but like, there's some shots that you look at and you're like, that, I don't know why you took that. Like, I know you took it because you can, but like, the efficiency on that is super low. And like, there were guys who were open. I just think I'd rather see them kind of ease him into a primary role than just like force feed him the ball and be like, you're the guy, you're getting 18, 19, 20 shots every night. Like, I'm fine if they kind of just use him as a play finisher and let him self-create every once in a while. That's what I think would be nice to see from him.
Yeah, it's kind of a catch-22 because he doesn't need to go anywhere with the ball because he's so big that he could just fire up over the top of everybody. But how efficient is that shot? Like you pointed out, what's the best way to utilize him as a play finisher, though? You mentioned like his base, his center of gravity, how strong he is not just yet. It's like using him, I guess, to pop off screens or to come around screens is fine. But what's the best way to get him going to the basket? Is it to use him as the primary screener or to use him as someone who's going to be like sort of more of the ducking guy or just be out in transition a ton so that he's not immediately having that impact on his body?
Yeah, and I think that's what we saw last night, right? And that's not necessarily an indication that he's going to do that forever, but like, he was mostly on the perimeter defensively, and then, after the shot, he was leaking out. He was leaking out every time, and I think they really want to get him going in transition because it's like, how do you stop that? How do you stop that? Unless you have someone who's like similarly sized to him, you're not going to. And like, guys would, they'd be with him right there. Like, there was Lou Dort with him. There was Osman Dang with him yesterday. And all he did was give them a ball fake. They're up in the air, and he dunked it. Like, there's nothing you can do about that. Now, they used him as a screener a little bit, like in the pick and roll, and I love seeing that. Like, he was really effective as a roll man with Metropolitans 92 last season, and I think he'll be fine in the NBA. But again, as you mentioned, like, it's all about managing his body, like taking a load off of him a little bit. And I think we're also going to see some pick and pop action with him. Like, we didn't see too much of that last night, but I anticipate they'll let him do that because as poor as he shot from three, like, as a professional, I do believe in the shot. And I think the Spurs do as well. And like, if he's going to have any hope of developing that shot, the best reps are in-game reps. Like, regardless of the percentage, let him get those shots up. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting during the season to just kind of evaluate, how do they use him? How does that change throughout the year? But I kind of believe Pop when he says, I don't know. Because if I'm being 100% honest, I don't know either. Like, there's just so many possibilities. And I don't know that there's necessarily a wrong way to use him, but it's going to be a whirlwind this season. Like, I really don't know what to expect. I'm just excited to whatever happens is going to happen, and that's what's going to be on the court.
Looking at the other side of the floor, rookies are notoriously bad on defense. In recent years, we've seen that flip a little bit where it's like Tari Eason comes in, Evan Mobley comes in, Walker Kessler comes in. Do you envision Wemby being that type of player, and what's sort of most intriguing to you about what he's able to do immediately as a defensive player?
Yeah, I think he should have a pretty immediate impact defensively. I mean, I think he's got really good instincts as a rim protector, even if he's not really like sitting in the paint, because we did see him a lot yesterday, as I mentioned, kind of like roaming, on those guys who are like your third, fourth options who are on the perimeter, as opposed to like banging bodies down low. He was still able to like rotate over and cover so much ground and come up with like contests, even if he wasn't blocking shots, like contesting shots, altering shots. And then when he was in the paint, it's like guys don't want to go near the rim. Like they're driving and they're immediately kicking out. They don't want any part of that. It was also really incredible. I don't know if you saw it, but there was a play where he was basically stationed at the top of the key on the 3-point line, and he digged for the ball, right, on a drive that was already deep in the paint, and he got it with his 8-foot wingspan, dislodged the ball. It is a fast break going the other way. And I was like, I don't think I've ever seen someone, like you see guys dig from the nail pretty routinely, and like they get a hand on the ball, or at least they're able to force an early pickup on those drives. I've never seen someone do that from like all the way at the 3-point line. Like it was crazy. So I think he will be impactful. Now there were moments where he's like gambling and he missed, but like he's a rookie. Like that's going to happen. And I think they'll give him the freedom to do that and make mistakes, but I think he will be impactful, though I don't think he's going to spend a lot of time necessarily, as we've seen. Like he's not going to spend a lot of time in the paint. I think, banging bodies with the Joel Embiids, with the Nikola Jokic's, with the Jonas Valanciunas'. I think he mostly will be on the perimeter. So that should be really fun to watch too, because I thought he did a pretty good job last night.
Yeah, and his like block radius is just basically like if he's I can't remember who he blocked, and I hope I didn't dream this, but I saw it from the Thunder game, I believe. He was like at the free throw line and like just swatted the shot away like from behind. And it's just like that's absolutely ridiculous. Do you see him when you're looking at how the Spurs have chosen or been forced to defend the last couple of years? Do you see him changing anything about them? You mentioned what Devin Vassell is able to do away from the ball. Now you have Wemby. Trey Jones, he's a pretty good presser, and you have Jeremy Sohan. Like, that could be like a pretty dangerous foursome defensively if you're willing to play a little bit more aggressively because you trust that Vassell and Wemby are just going to cover everything up. If you want Jeremy Sohan and Trey Jones to maybe play like press a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. I think that is exactly what it's going to allow the Spurs to do. And I wouldn't be surprised if this team goes from, historically, literally the worst defensive rating in NBA history to being like a top 15. I don't know if I could say top 10. I want to so bad, but I think the inexperience, the lack of chemistry so far, like they've got to, build that up. But I do think that they can be in the top half of defenses this year. I really think like they have a ton of versatility. We haven't even talked about guys like Zach Collins. We haven't talked about Julian Champagnie. We haven't talked about Blake Wesley, who we'll see if he gets minutes this season. I'm not really sure where he is, and we might talk about him later, but I think they've got a lot of really intriguing pieces. And I also think it's going to help a guy like Keldon Johnson. Like Keldon Johnson has struggled on the defensive end since he's come in the NBA. And I think if you just have a little bit of pressure relieved from him, knowing that like he can be a little bit more aggressive and it's all right if a guy gets by him, that it's not the end of the world, that it's not, going to force everything around him to collapse. And now you're facing, a compromised defense. Like, I think that's going to be huge for Keldon Johnson too. Like, regardless if he makes big strides like he's promised, like he's talked a big game, he wants to be better on the defensive end. Whether or not that happens, I don't think it matters that much. I think it's just going to make life easier for everyone, which is a great thing. Like, that's going to be a great thing.